Israel is already the largest recipient of US military funding, receiving $3.8 billion every single year. That's not just more US military funding than any other country receives on the planet, but actually more than all of them combined.
Not interested in having our retirement plans in a Wall Street speculation portfolio. We want something guaranteed.
Corporations don't want to pay their employees a fair living wage with a fair cost of living increase. Instead, they want to shift that over to stockholders.
Hello, my name is Stanley Heller. Welcome to The Struggle. We begin with a comment from the IMEU on the bill that would give Israel's military another $1 billion.
So the Senate is about to pass their version of the House bill approving yet another $1 billion in military funding for Israel. And Senator Bernie Sanders wrote a letter to Chuck Schumer supporting this funding, but calling on Congress to approve a matching $1 billion in reconstruction aid for Gaza. Now, here are a few things to keep in mind about all this. Bernie's letter includes an important and powerful call to Congress to be more concerned about the enormous destruction and suffering that Israel's attack on Gaza has brought upon Palestinians. It spells out the destruction of 1,000 homes, the damage to dozens of schools and hospitals, and it says that it would be unconscionable and irresponsible to give Israel another $1 billion while ignoring the people of Gaza. In what should be the bare minimum position of any person with decency, but sadly one that is rarely uttered in Congress, Bernie insists that Palestinians deserve the same right to peace and security that Israelis are entitled to. Now, of course, assisting with Gaza's reconstruction is important, because it makes a real difference in the lives of vulnerable people. But isn't there something grotesque in simultaneously providing military funding to the apartheid regime that is actively besieging and repeatedly destroying Gaza? You know, Palestinians are not victims of a natural disaster who are in need of charity. They are victims of oppression who are in need of freedom. And if we are going to live up to our moral responsibility of helping Palestinians rebuild the homes and schools and hospitals that Israel destroys, then why on earth would we give Israel more bombs to continue destroying Palestinian lives and livelihood again and again? Seems like we could just save ourselves the trouble by ending our support for oppression instead of enabling it and then providing aid to its victims. Bernie's letter called out the lie that anybody in Congress had proposed defunding Israel's Iron Dome, because the system is actually already fully funded. But that raises a better question. What on earth does Israel need another $1 billion in military funding for? You know, Israel is a wealthy country with a GDP of nearly $400 billion, with universal healthcare and government-subsidized college. They certainly can buy their own weapons if they want to. And on top of that, Israel is already the largest recipient of US military funding, receiving $3.8 billion every single year. That's not just more US military funding than any other country receives on the planet, but actually more than all of them combined. And this massive military funding enables Israel's illegal occupation of the Palestinian territories and Israel's crimes against Palestinians, which include land theft and home demolitions and the indiscriminate bombing of civilian areas, the sniper shooting of unarmed protesters and medics and journalists, and the abuse of Palestinian children in Israeli military detention. The last thing we should be doing is giving another $1 billion to apartheid. If you watched the so-called debate on the House floor about this added $1 billion in military funding, you saw two things. You saw members of Congress sound like bots regurgitating the exact same talking points that they've likely received from lobbyists.
And that commitment must remain ironclad.
Ironclad.
Ironclad. Purely defensive. Purely defensive.
And you also saw many members smear Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib for her opposition to this $1 billion in funding.
We cannot be talking only about Israelis' need for safety at a time when Palestinians are living under a violent apartheid system and are dying from what Human Rights Watch has said are war crimes. We should also be talking about Palestinian need for security from Israeli attacks. We must be consistent in our commitment to human life, period. Everyone deserves to be safe there.
I cannot allow one of my colleagues to stand on the floor of the House of Representatives and label the Jewish democratic state of Israel an apartheid state. That's anti-Semitism.
That is anti-Semitic.
Anti-Semitic.
Anti-Semites.
Anti-Semitism.
And what both of these things have in common is that they are manifestations of anti-Palestinian racism. Think about it. Why is there endless conversation about Israeli security, but not a word about Palestinians' need for safety and security. And Israel is the occupier and the oppressor here, and Palestinians are the occupied and the oppressed who are having their society destroyed. The fact that there is no discussion about Palestinians' need for security, from the US-made weapons that Israel drops on them no less, is an outrageous double standard and a serious moral failing among so many of our congressional leaders and the administration, who just don't see Palestinians as equal human beings who are deserving of the same security. And the smears against Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib are no different. She is a Palestinian American who dared to simply repeat what every major human rights organization in the world has already documented about Israel's crimes against Palestinians. And for that, anti-Palestinian members of Congress got away with smearing her with false anti-Semitism charges with impunity. But all of this ugly and dishonest rhetoric will ultimately achieve nothing. It will leave us stuck in the ugly situation that we find ourselves in. The only productive way forward is through justice, and that requires us to start seeing and treating Palestinians like equal human beings who are deserving of the same dignity and security and freedom as everyone else in the world. And that's precisely why our military funding for Israeli apartheid must end.
As of October 18th, the word is that Israel will get its money in a general defense bill. The Israeli press reports that Chuck Schumer has said he will get Congress to bankroll additional humanitarian aid for the Gaza Strip. Nobody is saying how much. So they get a couple $1 million for Gaza, a band-aid in a sea of hurt. I'm reminded of the classic book, A Tale of Two Cities. A speeding nobleman's carriage runs over and kills a peasant boy. The nobleman looks out, throws out a few coins, and speeds on. IMEU points out that the $3.8 billion that the U.S. is giving Israel each year is a lot of money. It's a quarter of the Israeli military budget. It should pay for the Iron Dome refills. Israel doesn't need another billion so it can increase the carnage. Congress made a geography mistake. It wasn't Israel that was devastated in the last military fight. The area that was wrecked was called Gaza. Senator Sanders should say what we say during demonstrations. Not another nickel, not another dime, no more money for Israel's crimes. From the Israeli site B'Tselem, an attack on Palestinians at al-Mufakara.
אנחנו נמות פה. אנחנו לא בנוסף, תרגיע אותם של הסביבה. אני לא אלך, אני ארתיק לך. חלאס. תגיד לו להפסיק לזרוק. מה, ועם הנשק שלך? הנשק שומר עליך. אלא הביתה. לך תכתוב איזה כתבה, לך תכתוב כתבה, לך. תיקח אותי לבור! זה הבית שלי! אל תוותר. לא, אני לא יכול. לא. זרק אבנים. משהו זרק אבנים? הנה, בבית שלנו. עם הרכב. הבית שלך במקרה הטוב ביתה. עם הרכב, עם הנשק, עם החיילים, עם הכל מה הוא רוצה. יאללה, טמבל, הביתה, לך תכתוב כתבה, לך תכתוב כתבה, טמבל. אמא שלך טמבל, ואבא שלך טמבל. אתה עושה עבריין עם הנשק עם החיילים, אה? מה, הוא בא לבתים, אתם עושים כלום. הוא בא לבתים, אתם... תסתום את הפה, אני אמרתי לך. אני אמרתי לך, תסתום את הפה. תסתום את הפה. ותלך הבית שלך. בוא רגע נדבר על מה קורה. אין דרך. תסתכל, ילד 4 שנה. ילד 4 שנה. אין שלום. אין שלום, יאללה. משם אנחנו. נתנו אין לו מעבר. אני לא אוכל כלום. זוז אחורה. אני לא אוכל. אני מצלם אותך! אני בבית שלי! זוז! לא לראות, הלו! אני סלם, אני בבית שלי! יא בן שרמוטה! יא בן שרמוטה! אנחנו בבית שלנו! אתה לא ראית מה עשו לבן... לא תעשה ככה! אל תעשה עבריין עליי! כן! עוד! יאללה עוד יא עבריינים! עוד יא נרצחים! חתיכת גזענים כולכם! עוף אתה! אני בבית שלי! אני בבית שלי! יורים בשביל הם רוצים... למה אתה יורה? אנחנו מצלמים אותך!
This is a routine occurrence. Gangs of colonialists trying to beat up people and steal their land. They are often called settlers. The chief settler leader is named Naftali Bennett. He's the Prime Minister of Israel. This summer in early June, a settler was seen grabbing an Israeli soldier's gun and then firing it at Palestinians. Again, video from B'Tselem.
يرى وتنحال يرى علائم أجيب زي الأخ أجيب الأخ مهير حزار بلي نشك حاليم زي زوكيم
חייל, הנה בורח, זה ירה, זה מצולם, הנה ברח, תיקח הברטים שלו. תזדהר.
شباب صف ألوف
אנחנו לא יכולים 3 אנשים על כולם. לא, האנשים יותר למטה כי הורדתי אותם.
After 4 months, the man was identified. And that was that. Nothing was done. The army said no one had made a complaint. There you go. On Senator Sanders' site, a good video about the John Deere strike and why we should support the strikers.
You get a chance to sit at home and some actual thinking time, and you think, really, what is my purpose here? Am I just to be some machine for some corporation to make money off of? And I more than share my time with my family with these companies, and for what?
They wanted us to agree to do away with pensions for any new hires that came after us.
I'm not willing to sell out my future brothers and sisters that might be coming in here. It could be your kid, it could be the kid down the street. We're not interested in having our retirement plans in a Wall Street speculation portfolio. We want something guaranteed.
Corporations don't want to pay their employees a fair living wage with a fair cost of living increase. Instead, they want to shift that over to stockholders and the president, CEOs, and vice presidents.
Over the last year, our CEO's pay has gone up 160%.
They're projected to make between $5.7 and $5.9 billion in profits this year. That wealth was created on the back of the workers that build these products.
We need a fair contract. We need it now. UAW 861.
I don't think anybody doesn't want to see John Deere make profits. We know that golden goose has to lay golden eggs, but man, it's time to share some of the gold.
If a president and CEO is getting $30 million a year and you have a person that's working the line that's making $15 an hour, tell me that's fair.
There's a labor shortage. Well, really, I think it's just a lack of respect and lack of wages is really what's going on.
We build some of the best equipment in the country, in the world, and all we're asking for is our fair stakes in this.
In a time when we have differences coming at us from a million different directions, people are putting aside those differences for the sake of solidarity, and it's a good feeling, and I think it's our time.
The cheap labor bubble is finally busting, and it's really the rebirth of the American labor movement.
As we record on the 22nd, this. The new Israeli government, the supposed government of change, has done something even Netanyahu didn't have the chutzpah to do, branding the leading Palestinian human rights groups as terrorist organizations. These are the groups' names: Adamir, Al-Haq, Bassan Center, Defense for Children International Palestine, the Samadun Palestinian Prisoner Solidarity Network, and the Union of Agricultural Work Committees. The Times of Israel reports that a member of parliament from the ultra-right Religious Zionist Party tried to barge in a hospital room where a Palestinian under administrative detention was being treated after weeks on hunger strike. It showed video of Itamar Ben-Gvir shouting and a Palestinian member of the Israeli parliament trying to push him back. Of course, there were no Israeli police to interfere with the harassment and a possible attack at a man in a hospital bed. Ben-Gvir's party is the most extreme in Israel. There's literally no political party further to the right and more unabashedly hateful. And that's saying something. Alexei Navalny, who survived a poisoning, who returned to Russia and who was then immediately thrown into prison, has been awarded the Sakharov Prize by the European Parliament. Past winners include Nelson Mandela, murdered Syrian activist Razan Zaitouna, jailed Iranian lawmaker Nasrin Sotoudeh, and Saudi political prisoner Raif Badawi. Talking about Russia, there was a piece in The Guardian on October 13th that said that the population of Russia had dropped by nearly 1 million in the past year, meaning 1 million more deaths than births. The single biggest problem is COVID. The piece says 660,000 have died from COVID in Russia. That's a shocking number. Search the web for COVID deaths by country, and you get an official figure of much less, 226,000. The Guardian got its number from the Moscow News, which was published in Moscow in a print edition and now is only online. If that number is accurate, that would put Russia number 2 after the United States on the list of shame with the top numbers of COVID deaths. It certainly is possible. The problem is that in Russia, even though they've had their own Sputnik 5 virus or vaccine, the Sputnik 5 vaccine has been out since January, but only 30% of the people have taken it. COVID seems to be out of control in Russia. The Moscow Times reports that Putin is considering to have a work holiday for all non-essential workers for a week. The order, seen by the Moscow Times, would close all non-essential stores, including restaurants, stores, museums, parks, and as well suspend planned medical procedures from October 30th to November 7th. If you tried, as I did, to go to the Bridgeport Zoning Board at its scheduled online meeting to try to save Remington Woods, you never got in. It was canceled without explanation or notice or apology. It is now set for November 16th at 6 p.m., if it happens. Yesterday I was watching a video about New York's Central Park. It's enormous if you've ever tried to walk it. 840 acres. But when I heard that number, I realized that Remington Woods is half that size, 420 acres. We're talking in a big area, thousands of mature trees that sequester, that trap dangerous carbon dioxide. And that's what the DuPont spinoff wants to improve upon and use for an area for office buildings. The next big Connecticut climate rally will take place on Saturday, October 30th, on the northern steps of Hartford's Capitol from 2 to 4. The gathering will include speakers, guerrilla theater, mural art making, and more. A Jali and African or Afro-Caribbean and West African drumming group will lead the march around the Capitol. Speakers at the rally will be Tanaya Taylor, Executive Director of the Nonprofit Accountability Group, Michio Agresta, Fridays for Future, and Kay Donnelly, No More Dirty Power in Killingly. Rally organizers include NAACP Windham Willimantic Branch, Connecticut Women's March, Sunrise Connecticut, BLM 860, Connecticut Climate Crisis Mobilization, 350 Connecticut, and Sierra Club, Connecticut. Now a minute from our climate activist hero Greta Thunberg as she riffs on the climate promises of liberals.
We must find a smooth transition towards a low-carbon economy. There is no planet B. There is no planet blah. Blah, blah, blah. Blah, blah, blah. This is not about some expensive, politically correct green act of bunny hugging or blah, blah, blah. Build back better, blah, blah, blah. Green economy, blah, blah, blah. Net zero by 2050, blah, blah, blah. Net zero by 2050, blah, blah, blah. Net zero, blah, blah, blah. Climate neutral, blah, blah, blah. This is all we hear from our so-called leaders. Words. Words that sound great, but so far has led to no action. Our hopes and dreams drown in their empty words and promises.
Hola, ¿qué tal todos? Buenas tardes.
Good afternoon, how are you?
Mi nombre es Pedro Espinosa, soy originario de un pueblo de las faldas de la Malinche, ubicado en el estado de Tlaxcala, en México.
My name is Pedro Espinosa. I live in the region at the foot of the Malinche volcano in Tlaxcala, Mexico. That's where I come from.
Hoy les quiero platicar un poco de lo que está pasando en nuestro estado.
And today I want to tell you a little bit about what is happening in my hometown.
Debido a todo estos descuidos que hemos tenido en el cambio climático,
because of the disregard for climate change.
Pero claro que no solo somos nosotros los culpables, sino que son las grandes corporaciones que han abusado de la explotación.
So because people have not been caring for the environment, but also because the big corporations have been plundering and polluting the environment.
Muchos de los países latinoamericanos, lo que hoy estamos tratando de controlar en nuestros países es un total descontrol. Nadie sabe ni cómo componer el problema de nuestro medio ambiente.
Climate change is out of control in our countries in Latin America.
That's our program for today. See you next week at this time. I'm Stanley Heller for The Struggle.